this first part, we're going to talk about how the wheel hub and the wheel spindle work together, and how the bearings ride and how it all locks together. So in an earlier video, you watched me heat up the wheel hub, freeze the bearing races, and drop them in. So we have the inner bearing that goes against this race that you can see right here, and then we have the outer bearing which goes against this race inside there. And essentially what we're going to do is sandwich those two bearings on the spindle so that the outer bearing is going to ride out here and the inner bearing is going to ride right here, and we're going to use these locking nuts and washer to hold it all together. We'll run the first locking nut down on the spindle to set the pressure of the bearings, and we'll kind of go through that on the assembly part, but you'll install it, to where they're tight. There's no wiggle, but it still freely spins. And the first locking nut you're going to install is the one with a little bit of it's got like a little pin sticking out of it. And let me get this over by the camera so you can see it a little bit better. But in essence, we're going to screw this one down, set the pressure of the bearings, use this one to lock it, and then this one torque down on top of it all to hold it in place so that it doesn't work itself back out. So all three of these work together to hold the hub on the spindle at a good pressure on those bearings. All right, so the first one that you install, you can see there's this little pin that kind of sticks up, and you want that facing up in this position or out towards the wheel when you put it in, because the next thing you'll do is you'll install the washer, and the washer has to line, one of the holes of the washers has to line up with that pin, and the little key here needs to line up with the key in the spindle. So you have it slides over. So it'll go on this, and it will take a little bit of, once you get this down to a position that is good, you might have to adjust it a little bit to get everything to line up correctly. So I'm going to bring this up to the camera, see if it'll focus. Turn the light on the camera. Hey, look at that. You can see now. All right, so this key is going to go right over that. You want flat side in. And then you want to make sure that lines up. Otherwise, if it doesn't line up, it's not going to sit flush. And you want it to sit flush. And then that, I guess it's basically a washer, keeps that inner one from being able to turn, because that little thing. And then this outer one goes on to lock the whole thing together. Like that. And then that's what holds all the bearings in place, keeps your wheel on. Okay, so inner wheel bearing goes in. Like so. Clean that off real quick. So, all right, now this inner seal that's going to go right there, I'm pretty sure this red coating on here is something like Loctite 515. And I'm only adding extra just as sort of a lubricant to help get it to go in a little bit easier. So this part is probably not necessary. I'll do it anyway. Then you just need something like a block to kind of help try to get it to pop in all at the same time, as opposed to going in a little crooked, which inevitably they do anyway. There it goes. Just like that. Okay, and you just want it flush with the surface. It's going to mean that that inner bearing, it's not all the way up against that inner bearing, and you don't need it to be. I don't think you want it to be. I like to stuff a little bit extra grease kind of in and behind the seal as much as possible, just to kind of, more grease the better, I suppose. And that, again, that spindle locking nut is just going to pinch everything down onto the spindle where it's supposed to be and hold it in place. And this back seal is just dust. It's just to keep dust out of this area, so that I'll put some extra on the front side of that bearing. Just kind of goop it in there. Don't want those guys to go dry. Okay, now on to the axle install. Okay, so this part, zooming in on the axle so you can see a little bit closer. This will go into the differential, and this of course will go into the spindle, and it'll ride like this. So make sure that's on the screen. Yep. And so essentially this back part is going to ride up against here, and there's a couple of seals that help keep everything together and dust out of the spindle itself. One of them is going to be this little tiny guy, and when we installed the needle bearings, we didn't go all the way down, we just went down far enough for this guy to kind of clear, and it's a little bit of a cup shape, and you want that cup to go inside to hold the grease on in those needle bearings. And then we also have on the axle side a little spacer. This is, I believe, plastic. It feels lightweight. It's got a little taper to compensate for the taper of the axle itself right here. So you want to slide that, and then what that does is space away from this lip here, and it helps everything seal up against. So that's going to seal right in here like that, up against that little rubber seal. So you want that to be in there. You might check, see if you can get this. I didn't get a new one. It didn't look like I needed one, so I just reused my old one. And then you're going to have this kind of a dust cap seal that's going to sit up on this part and ride right in here on the spindle to keep dust out of there. So a little bit of lubrication here helps the install. And this is actually a little bit easier to install on the bench than after the axle is installed. You can do it, it's not that big a deal. It's just happens to be a little bit easier to do it here, get that positioned so that the whole thing goes in. Okay, and then of course we want to get that needle bearing good and lubricated, and you just want to press in to those needle bearings. Best you can. That looks disgusting and sounds equally disgusting. Just lubricate the middle. I feel dirty. Alright, and this guy go in. We'll put a little grease on the inside of that seal just to aid in the shaft going in. I don't know if I can do this video now. Alright, so I'll put a little bearing grease on the end here just to help aid the axle shaft going in and through that that inner bearing, that inner seal, sorry, that inner axle seal. And you can see where it's polished right here, where that axle seal sits. Ooh, that might be a little much. Just lubricate the shaft. Okie dokie. Alright, in she goes. This one's a lot easier to install. It's the short one. One on the long side is much more difficult. There it goes. There we go. Nicely engaged. And you can see it sits back far enough that you can get that seal on in this position, but it's just a little bit easier to do it on the bench. Okay, so this next part isn't necessary, it's just something I do whenever I'm working on two surfaces that tend to rust together, and that's going to be the steering knuckle to the spindle. I just put a little bit of anti-seize, just a tiny layer. Gonna spin inside that spindle. So okay, now that we got everything nice and lubricated, we'll carefully install it. There we go. So it's a snug fit, and it's not going to want to go on all the way. So I'll take a couple of the mounting nuts and just use them to work it down nice and snug, and then we'll have to back it off so that we can put the dust shield on it. That looks nice and seated. Pop it off. All right, so next we've got the dust shield for the brakes, which is interesting. On other vehicles, the dust shield is separate from the caliper bracket, but this is the caliper bracket and the dust shield is welded to it. And there's, if you remember, in taking it apart, there's just a little supportive bolt on this side. It also helps you to line up your caliper bracket so that you don't have your bracket in the wrong position. So I could not find a torque rating for this. I'm sure it's somewhere. But it just holds this, probably to keep it from rattling or something. It is a 7/16. We'll just take it down snug. There we go. All right. Now for the wheel hub assembly. More lubrication. Lubricate where that back seal will ride. Lubricate where the bearings go. Okay, the hub goes on, and you just kind of press it in until you feel it go up over that back seal, and hopefully it's a good and tight fit. Okay, so I had to reposition the camera so that I had enough room to get in here, and I just needed to be able to grab the hub and give it a good jam. It'll just kind of pop right on. So once it's on, then we want to slide in the outer bearing. So get that kind of in there best we can. And then we've got our locking nuts we talked about earlier. And this one, start with the one with the little pin that sticks out. Get that guy spun in there. There it goes. We'll really kind of crank it down, see if so now I don't have any front to back movement. Nothing's wiggly. Okay, that goes to show you like how much you really want to get it, you know, down and tight against those bearings to really seat it on that spindle and get those bearings in position. Otherwise, you're going to burn through those bearings. All right, so I feel pretty good about that level of resistance. Feels like it'll spin freely. All right, so then comes the magical trick. Getting everything to line up right. And unfortunately I can't get the camera in there and my big old fingers. So, and this is just going to be really trial and error. You just get it in there. Looks like it might line up. First trick is getting that key to line up on the spindle, and then you can worry about there we go. Got it over the spindle, but don't have it lined up with the hole. So out it comes. I don't think I do. Come on. Ah, crud, I do. Well, I was looking at the wrong hole. I'm glad I checked. All right, everything still feels nice and tight and spins freely. All right, so now we put this guy on. Lad. Okay, so the book calls for this to be torqued down to 90 foot-pounds. I'm sorry, 85 foot-pounds. But I'm going to take it just a little further to 90. There we go. All right, feels good and tight. No forward-backward play. Got a nice free spin to it. Okay, that's how we install the bearings. Now onto the Warn selectable locking hubs. Okay, so for installing the Warn selectable hub, we upgraded to it from the stock one, which was just a spring to provide tension at the end of this. It was just an all-time locked hub. So this gear's solid, attached to the axle, which attached to the hub. And so as the wheel turned, the axle turned the whole time. And so we pull this stuff out, easy enough, and we install the warn. There we go. Nope, not quite lined up. There we go. Just kind of goo that around. Since I'm wasting good grease. So once we've got this installed, there's a snap ring that goes over the axle, and then there's a snap ring that goes around the wheel hub. And here's our snap ring. And should be able to do it by hand. There we go. Oh, there we go. Snapped into that groove right there. Looking good. Okay, and then the next snap ring is going to, there should be a groove just right in there. I think it's clear. We'll see. Okay, here's the snap ring. Okay, so after all that struggle, back and forth, I realized the axle was actually in just a hair, and I didn't have the strength to pull it out this way. I had to go in from the differential side, use a long screwdriver just to kind of pry it out this way. And now that snap ring should go in like a champ. Look at that. Click. I like that sound. I can visually see that it is clicked in. Okay. Oh, everything still spins well. No slop. All right. So now just for the pretty part. And I did put, of course, put a little bit of extra lube in here because, well, I was cleaning it. I've cut that part out of the video, but trying to see in there, I had so much grease in there, I couldn't see where the snap ring clicked down, so I shot it with some cleaner. We'll just get a little bit more grease in there. And then we'll try to run a little bit around the edge here. That's because this cap has an O-ring right there. And it just helps keep the dust out. Everything to keep the dust out. All right, so do our best to line up the holes. Just gonna push it on, and I can show. And then you're still gonna need get down here and eyeball it. Oh my gosh, chrome, shiny, blinded. Alright, so it is in a free position. And now, put it over and engage it. And there it goes. Put it back. Disengage it. Ta-da! Whoo! And that is how you do that. And I am done. Thanks for watching.